The third tip, and I'm really guilty about doing this in the past, is don't cut. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having a fantastic day. It is Friday, May 19th here in South Georgia, and today we're going to give raised bed sweet potatoes a try in a couple of these beds here behind me. I'm also going to give you some sweet potato tips that I've learned recently from talking to a sweet potato expert. So we've got lots of stuff going on here in the raised bed garden. Got some garlic we need to pull, some leeks that are getting close, got marigolds and cherry tomatoes in a few of these beds, got some cucumbers that are just starting to produce really nice, got some of those multiplying onions we planted a few videos ago, taters still kicking, and some squash still kicking back there. But we've also got a few beds where we need to plant something else. So earlier today I just cleaned out this bed here. Had a few more parsnips to pull there. Had some mustard greens in there that had kind of seen better days. So we got that one cleaned out. It's ready to plant. And then we have this bed which still has some collard greens in it. The bugs have been working on these pretty hard the last few weeks. I'm not confident these are going to make it through the summer because they normally don't. So I want to utilize the space in the middle here. And in the center of this bed is where we buried all those fish guts and fish heads a few weeks ago. I told you about that on that video we did, talking about good and bad gardening advice. So we've already planted a few sweet potato plants on the back half of the property. We had a little piece of a row there where we stuck some Georgia Jet plants a few videos ago. So we got those in the ground. I've never grown sweet potatoes in raised beds, but no reason why it shouldn't work, and since we have some open space, it's going to be the perfect time to give it a try. So these are the plants we're going to be planting today. We got these from Steele Plant Company, same place we got those Georgia Jet plants that we planted a week or two ago. Same place we'll be getting some Orleans plants probably the next week or two for a larger in-ground planting. And if you buy sweet potatoes online from Steele, when you get them in the mail, they might look a little wilted, but you can revive them pretty easy with just a jar and some water. So I got these plants in the mail, I think 3, maybe 4 days ago, and then I took them out of the packaging, put them in a jar of water here, and I would replace the water every day to kind of give it some fresh oxygenated water. And in just a matter of days, these plants perk up nicely here and look really healthy again. So this variety here is called Bunch Puerto Rico. We've grown this variety before in one of our in-ground plots. I think it was actually this plot right here before we converted it all to raised beds. So this is what they call a bush type sweet potato variety. It will still get kind of big and bushy, but it won't make those long trailing vines like traditional sweet potato varieties do, like a Georgia Jet or a Beauregard or a Covington will. So Steele on their website has 2 different bush varieties that are good for containers or raised beds. They've got the Bunch Puerto Rico, which we have here, and another variety called Varieties, which we've grown before, and it did pretty well for us in the in-ground garden. And just a little tip, if you're wanting to grow some sweet potatoes, and sweet potatoes are a great thing to grow during the middle of the summer when sometimes it's too hot to grow much else, you need to act quick. I think Steele Plant Company quits taking orders around the end of May, stop shipping because they have to plant their sweet potato crop for the following year. So you need to go ahead and get these ordered. If you want to grow some, you can do that at sweetpotatoplant.com, or I'll put our affiliate link down below. So we've got about 14 plants there, and the roots have really popped on those since we set them in that jar of water. They're looking really, really good. 14 plants should be a plenty for this bed and that bed over there. These beds are pretty much the same length. That skinny bed may be a little bit longer. 14 plants will be more than enough for both of these. Now in this bed where we have the collards, we have a line of drip tape underneath each collard row. We've lost a few collard plants over the months. That's why this spot here is kind of bare. And I thought about adding a few more lines down the center here, but these 2 lines here usually do a pretty good job of keeping this bed moist. So I don't think I'm going to add any more drip lines. Just going to plant our sweet potatoes right down the center here. I am, as always, going to put a little pre-plant fertilizer down, a little Nature Safe 855 right down the center here. And then I'm just going to kind of scratch that into the soil a little bit there, get it incorporated a little bit, break up that crust a little bit so it'll be easier to plant our slips. And then for our slips here, we need to put these about, I don't know, 12, 14 inches apart. Not going to really measure this, just going to kind of eyeball it there. Since I've got more than enough slips here, I'm going to pick out some of the better looking ones out of the group and use those. Maybe we can get 5 or 6 plants in here. There we go, that should work pretty well. Then we're just going to poke these into the ground here, try to kind of maintain a straight line with our sweet potato plants. Hopefully I don't get poked by a fish bone digging around in here. But I buried that fish pretty deep. It's kind of way down there, almost where the normal soil level is. All right, there we go. One bed down, one more to go. So in this bed, we're going to do the same thing. We've got 2 drip lines here. These drip lines are going to be a little closer to these plants than they were in the other bed, but that'll be okay. These 2 lines here should keep everything nice and happy. We've actually got some little mushrooms coming out of the ground right here. So it looks like we got some good biology going on in this soil. Just like I did in the other bed, we're going to get a little pre-plant fertilizer down the center here. Get that scratched in a little bit there. Get our slips spaced out here, 12, 14 inches apart, something like that. It looks like I've got 2 left there. We might try to find somewhere to stick those. Let's go ahead and get these put down in the soil here. We should have some nice aerated soil down there, some nice tunnels in there, because those parsnips we had here had roots going way down, almost down to the native soil. So we should have some nice aeration and drainage in here. All right, so that'll keep this bed and the other bed occupied for the next 90 to 100 days, or mostly through the heat of summer. Now, just because these are bush sweet potato varieties doesn't mean that these plants are not going to get bigger than these beds. We'll probably still see the plants kind of falling over the sides of the beds. They just don't produce those long trailing vines like a Georgia Jet or a Beauregard. So if you plant some of these in a container or a raised bed, know that the plants are still going to get pretty big. They're just not going to put runners out everywhere like traditional sweet potato varieties. Alright, so now let's talk about some sweet potato growing tips that I've kind of picked up on over the last couple of months, talking with Larry over at Steele Plant Company. And my original plan was to do kind of a video interview, much like we did with Jim at Wood Prairie Farm. We were talking about potatoes. I was going to do one on sweet potatoes, but they've been busy, I've been busy, we just never got around to doing it. So instead, I'll just share with you a lot of the information that Larry has told me. So first, let's talk about fertility. So obviously we gave ours that Nature Safe 855 at planting, which is a somewhat balanced fertilizer, not completely balanced. And that's what you want to give them in the beginning, assuming you don't have your nutrients or your major nutrients kind of out of whack. If you've got a ton of P or K in your soil, you might want to adjust what you give them. But for most folks, a balanced fertilizer in the beginning is going to be good. And then once the plants get going, assuming you don't have an overabundance of potassium in your soil, you want to give them some extra potassium. You don't want to give them a bunch of extra nitrogen, because you'll make all plant and not many sweet potatoes in the ground there. So I wouldn't recommend giving them any manure or anything like that, because you're going to make a bunch of leaves but not many sweet potatoes. Now there are several different sources of potassium you could use for side dressing the sweet potatoes. You could use wood ash. You could use sulfate of potash, which is organic. We've used that before. There's also some organic stuff out there called langbonite, which is a good potassium source. So lots of good options out there as far as potassium you could use. Secondly, let's talk about hilling or growing the sweet potato plants on a mound. So Larry does recommend this, either kind of mounding up soil around the plants as they grow, or planting them in a mound to start with. So that's what we did back there when we planted those Georgia Jets. We made a mound on top of the soil, poked the plants down into the mound. Here, obviously, we just planted them on the flat bed, but as these plants grow, I'm going to come in there and add some more soil and kind of make a mound up around those plants, hilling them in the process. The third tip, and I'm really guilty about doing this in the past, is don't cut the vines as they grow. So what I've done in the past is I would plant a row of sweet potatoes kind of close to the end of one of my plots. When the vines would kind of run out in the grass, they would just get cut by the lawnmower when I'm cutting the grass. They said that cutting the vines, even some of those far out outside vines, can really compromise the production of sweet potatoes. So try not to cut the vines, just let them run and run and run. So if you've got a plot, an in-ground plot, or somewhere you're going to be planting these, plant them far enough inside the plot where you're not going to be chopping vines that grow outside the plot. Now the fourth one, and we talked about this when we planted those Georgia Jets over there, is consistent watering. Now sweet potato plants are pretty drought tolerant. It takes some pretty hot and dry weather for them to look like they're suffering, but supposedly, according to Larry, you really got to give them consistent watering over their lifespan to get some good production out of them. So they may not look like they need a lot of water, but you want to be consistent with the water. That way you can get a nice harvest. And then the fifth tip or rule, which I'm really guilty of breaking, is keeping up with the date when you put your sweet potato plants in the ground and knowing the listed maturity date for that variety. So what can happen, and I've had this happen plenty of times, if you leave them in the ground too long, they'll get too big, they'll start splitting, and they'll end up looking pretty gnarly. And according to Larry, what causes those split or gnarly looking sweet potatoes is inconsistent watering as they mature, kind of in the last little stage of their growth there. So let's say you've been having some dry weather, the plants look okay, but it's pretty dry in the soil there, and then all of a sudden you get a bunch of rain one week. He said that's what causes those sweet taters to split and start to crack open. So that kind of goes back to the importance of consistent watering. If you had been watering consistently, getting a bunch of rain at one time might not cause so much splitting. And kind of as a side note to that, I was talking to Larry about my Georgia Jet grow outs in the past. So Georgia Jet makes more of a round sweet potato as opposed to an elongated sweet potato. And every time we grow them, we're going to get, say, 4 or 5 sweet potatoes in the row that just get huge like a football. They're all split open, kind of ugly looking. And I was asking him what we could do about that to kind of keep that from happening. So what Larry recommended is consistent watering, of course, we talked about that, but he also said if you have frequent problems with some sweet potatoes getting too big and splitting, try planting the plants or the slips closer together. So as opposed to maybe a 12-inch spacing, put them 10 inches apart. That's going to crowd them up a little bit and probably keep some of them from getting too big and splitting. And back to the maturity date thing real quick. So Larry said once your sweet potato plants get close or right at that listed maturity date, that's when you want to start scratching around a little bit. You know, every year's different, the weather's different, so that maturity date may not be exactly true to the date. But when you get to that maturity date, start scratching around, looking at your sweet potatoes, seeing if they're optimal size for harvest. That's how you prevent them from getting too big. Looking around in there saying, okay, these are nice sized sweet potatoes, let's go ahead and get them. So hopefully those tips were helpful for both beginner and experienced sweet potato growers, and I can't wait to see these beds in here filled with sweet potato plants running over the sides of the beds and maybe even on the ground a little bit. So you can find our affiliate link for sweet potato plants in the description below. And if you want to see our sweet potato harvest from last year, check out this video right here. I think you'll be equally impressed with that Orleans variety that we grew for the first time last year. And you'll understand why we're going to be planting some more of those in the next few weeks. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.